Listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this follow-up question and answer webinar today, this Thursday afternoon. And as a follow-on from our previous webinar back in October, we want to take the opportunity to act on your feedback and give you another opportunity, in fact, to ask further questions. To guide you through today's webinar is myself, Dominic Green, Technical Advisor for Business. Alongside me is Mandy Slaney, the Industry Manager for Business. And at the end of the webinar, halfway through the webinar, Veronica Capaldi, Lead Independent Endpoint Assessor for Customer Service Practitioner, will be taking your questions and answers, as well as going through those that were given to us from previously. At the end of the slide deck then, we will give you an opportunity to ask further questions, and if we don't get a chance to go through them, we will indeed do a frequently asked questions session like we did previously. So, agenda for today's webinar, a brief recap including why we've made the changes or recommendations, quick overview of the interview, and moving on to the recommendation around using the report and presentation, and then we're going to pass over to Veronica, who's going to go through your questions answered. Finally, as mentioned previously, we're going to do a final Q&A before uploading the recorded webinar along with the frequently asked questions. So just to recap then, the present methods of assessment for the Level 2 Customer Service Practitioner standards are as follows: an apprentice showcase portfolio, an observation, and a professional discussion. You can see that the changes we have implemented now involve that interview around the showcase portfolio. What we've got to stress here is that only the evidence which should go into the showcase must be linked to the case Bs, which are directly attributed to the showcase only. If the showcase includes evidence which isn't relevant or is excessive, this could really result in the evidence being returned to the learner as it's not really applicable. What we found is that the professional discussion is becoming excessive, which is impacting on the learner. So the new recommendations for the showcase are in the form of either a written report or indeed as a recorded audio presentation. This will be submitted as it was previously to City and Guilds 2 weeks prior to the endpoint assessment date as per normal. So let's now briefly recap as to why these changes have been introduced. Now, we've seen high volumes of endpoint assessments. We've seen the best results really from these recommendations, from these styles of format, and essentially we feel an apprentice is likely to find the writing of a report or the making of a presentation is perhaps more beneficial and appealing to them. It might also be the case that they're more likely in their daily work to actually write reports or indeed to make a presentation, rather than actually building a showcase portfolio. It also has allowed them to communicate their examples quite clearly across and explain why they did something or actually what they meant by it. The recommendations should allow clearer guidance on what we could expect to see within that portfolio for centres. It should eliminate too little or too much evidence being submitted and hopefully improve the quality overall. So the interview is a new area that's been introduced, and it's essentially to allow any gaps in the showcase to be addressed and for the apprentice to add depth and enrich the evidence presented in their showcase. So we've got to reiterate, this interview will focus purely on the showcase, whereas previously the professional discussion incorporated it. It's therefore nothing new really, but simply clearer for the learner. It also means that the professional discussion will focus on the mandatory criteria. Just to reiterate, if the apprentice still wishes to use the old showcase portfolio method, this will still be accepted, but an interview will still take place. However, we do strongly recommend that the new recommendations are considered and pushed forward. Please remember that to mention to the apprentice that they may take a hard or digital copy of the portfolio into the interview with them, as this can often act as a support mechanism. The learner may refer back to it during the interview, but the EPA, however, won't remind or refresh the learner's memory to tell them to bring that showcase portfolio in. it is on the learner's memory really to do that. So let's look now at the two methods that we are talking about. So as a written report, the showcase will be presented as either the report between 3,000 to 4,500 words, not including appendices, or as a recorded audio presentation of between 30 to 45 minutes, including appendices. The apprentice will be interviewed by the IEPA and answer questions based on that evidence submitted. It's an opportunity really for the IEPA to delve deeper into the apprentice's learning and experience. So as we mentioned previously, if the learner uses the report style format or the recorded audio presentation, this will be submitted to City and Guilds 2 weeks prior to the interview. This ideally would take place on the same day as the practical observation and the professional discussion, unless there are any special requirements really there. So the interview is mandatory, must stress that, and will take place after the observation and generally prior to the professional discussion. We've really got to stress as well that you must ensure that a suitable controlled environment throughout the duration of that assessment is offered, i.e. an exam room equivalent, a quiet room, which is free from distraction and influence. Essentially, we need to think of the learner. We don't want that learner to be impacted on by somebody else walking into that room. So that showcase interview then we talked about is going to last between 15 and a maximum of 30 minutes, whilst a professional discussion will last a maximum of 60 minutes. So previously on the webinar, we talked about the topics to be covered, the knowledge of your organisation, day-to-day customer service activities, and the self-assessment and PDP method. The models and criteria for the showcase portfolio have been broken down really into these three key areas. These three key areas are taken from the assessment plan, and what we've done then is place the criteria within the three topic areas. By revisiting the original webinar, you'll be able to see this structure in a clearer detail. We do break this down quite significantly to support the learner and would almost act as a template. So that previous webinar I mentioned can be found on the City and Guilds website under the Business Qualifications tab, should you need to refresh your memory. Within the new recording forms pack then, which again can be found on that City and Guilds website under 9794, this can be downloaded. There is actually a structured presentation template as well, which learners may find useful. You can see from the screenshot there actually the start of that template, so slide 1, understanding your organisation, and it is giving guidance there as to what the learner can put on that first slide. It goes on and on to go through slides 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., each which have been broken down into the three topics we've mentioned previously. Now, with that in mind, we've got to stress that it is only a recommendation, but obviously there is key structure there which would support that learner throughout. So what else do we need to know? Well, as mentioned in the previous webinar, the new recommendations have started as of this week. So anybody now with an endpoint assessment, any learner which partakes in an endpoint assessment as of this week, will have that showcase interview as mandatory, which will last between 15 to 30 minutes. If you do have apprentices already registered, they can complete either method of the assessment. So for example, the original method of building a showcase, which would still have that interview, or indeed the reports between 3,000 to 4,500 words, or the presentation with audio transcript over the top. We do recommend the last two, but please note that whichever method that you do choose will be followed by an interview. A number of times actually since we hosted the webinar, I've had the question, do we do an original style showcase and one of the others? No, the choice is one of the three really, but we must stress that the reasons why we've offered the report and presentation is because we have seen the best results develop from that. Okay, so You can see there a screenshot of the 9794 website on the City and Guilds webpage. The revised customer EPA pack alongside the recording forms packs now available to download. Please be careful in which version you download. Version 1 refers to the traditional method of showcase portfolio building and should only be used should a portfolio really be developed in that way. Version 2 should be downloaded and used should apprentices wish to follow the new recommendations of either a PowerPoint or a report with interview. If you are sticking by the original version 1, the old style of building a showcase portfolio, please refer to version 2 for further information around the interview. Again, just to reiterate, all these can be found under City and Guilds website 9794. What I'm going to do now is pass you over to one of our lead independent endpoint assessors, Veronica, who will go through your questions and answers which were generated from the previous webinar, as well as offering the chance for further live questions.
Okay, thank you, Dom. I am one of the forces for the Customer Service Practitioner Standard, and it's great to have the opportunity to be able to join you all this afternoon. Our last webinar directly, but also give you that extra level of support. Thank you to those of you that did send in your questions. We've taken some of those that were asked at the last webinar, and we're going to focus on those now for you. The questions that we received were based not only on the new Apprentice Showcase assessment, but also other areas of the endpoint assessment. So I shall be looking at all three areas with the next part of the webinar, and then finally give you an opportunity to ask any further questions that you may have. As a result of the last webinar and today, we are compiling a FAQ document, and that will include all questions and answers that we receive and engage with over the next these two webinars, and they will be available on our website along with the recording of this webinar and a copy of the slide deck. Okay, so the first area that I want to focus on is the Apprentice Showcase. So Dom's given us a really good overview there of the new method, the new assessment method that we've introduced to support the showcase. And these are some of the questions that we received during the webinar. So a lot of people asked, can an audio recorded witness statement be used as showcase evidence? So the answer to that is yes. We do currently accept audio witness testimonies within the showcase. But of course, as with all evidence, it has to meet the assessment requirements, and VACs needs to be followed and met accordingly with written or audio witness testimonies. So it's very clear who is making that witness testimony, their role and relationship to that learner, the date, and really that witness testimony is contextualized and is relevant. So another key point Dom made there is about the relevance of the evidence. Our new template and structures that we have put in place for you really does focus around the pass and distinction criteria. So if you do follow that, it will help you to build a successful portfolio and to really hone in on that assessment criteria, so we don't get evidence that's irrelevant and the apprentice isn't putting together evidence that will not meet the areas of the standard that it needs to. Okay, so if we can move on to the next one there, please, Don. Thank you. So the other question, obviously because we are giving you the option to upload audio files and the presentation potentially with a supporting audio, what's the maximum file size that can be uploaded to the portal? So at the moment, the maximum file size is 150 megabytes. So that's the current maximum file size, but we are working with our IT specialists here at City and Guilds to increase this. So please look out for any updates on that, but we will try and increase that so it can be a larger file. If you do have any issues with uploading files, please do get in touch with our endpoint assessment team who can support you. So the next question, Are spelling, punctuation and grammar errors taken into consideration when the showcase portfolio is assessed by the EPA? Now, of course, it's good practice that spelling, punctuation and grammar should be as accurate as possible in all apprentices' work, and we should be encouraging them to check this and make sure that it's as accurate as possible. Errors that occur or that we find will not affect the assessment decisions made by the EPA unless the meaning and context of that evidence has been changed as a result of the errors. So if it is particularly bad, or if there are lots of errors, or the meaning is unclear, then of course that may affect the ability for that evidence to meet the pass or distinction criteria. So please do bear that in mind, that they carry out a thorough check of their work before it is submitted to us. Another question we get asked an awful lot, will there be an exemplar showcase made available? We get, I know that Dom and the team get asked, what does a good one look like? What does distinction look like? Well, in answer to that, we will not be providing an exemplar showcase in terms of a completed showcase for you. What we have provided you with, however, is some exemplar structures for the report and the presentation slides provided within the EPA assessment pack recording forms, which is version 2.1 on our website. There's several reasons really. If we're providing an example that's been, has achieved that result, of course that's very particular to that apprentice. It's every showcase is different and should be different, so it's very difficult to put together, this is what you should put in to reach a distinction, for example. But we do hope that the structures that we've put in place for you will help you, whatever the apprentice, whatever their role, to put together a successful and succinct showcase, and the key word there being showcase. It should be the very best of what they can produce. We're not expecting lots and lots of evidence. Lots of evidence doesn't automatically mean lots of past criteria has been met. It's about the quality, the relevance of that piece of evidence, so the very best that they can produce. Okay, so next question. Dom covered this a little bit earlier, but can the apprentice have their showcase with them during the showcase interview? Now, yes, of course, they can take in their showcase into the interview. Like Dom said, it can act as a support mechanism for them to have. They can have a hard copy or electronic copy of their showcase with them. Only the showcase that was submitted at Gateway can be taken into the interview, and strictly no additional notes pertaining to the professional discussion criteria are allowed into the assessment. As Dom said, the professional discussion was an area that we used to cover some areas of the showcase in. So this extra interview that we've put in place is purely about the showcase. So that's the important thing here, is that the evidence that they submit needs to be relevant to those knowledge, skills and behaviours against the standard, and not relating, for instance, for the mandatory criteria from the professional discussion. This will help the apprentice, if the EPA has some extra questioning, to delve deeper into their learner journey, ask for clarification on evidence. If it is relevant, that apprentice will then have that evidence in front of them that is relevant to that, rather than having evidence that's not relevant to the standard for the showcase. That's really important. The EPA will not remind the apprentice on the day to bring in their showcase portfolio. So another good thing is, good practice is to ensure that your apprentice is familiar with their showcase evidence, as well as the areas that the EPA may be asking them about. We appreciate that evidence is compiled across the apprenticeship, the course of the apprenticeship, and some evidence can be from the very start, especially if it's looking at developmental areas or personal development plans, etc. So it may be some time since they've seen that evidence. So please prepare them well and get them to have a look and refresh themselves on the examples, on the situations perhaps that they've reflected on, the examples of the customers that they've worked with. This will really help them when they come to have any questions about that evidence. So I think we've touched on this a little bit already, but one question: how can the apprentice prepare for the showcase interview? As I said, just ensure that they're familiar with their evidence. And as Dom said, give them every opportunity to have that experience, that half an hour with that EPA, which is free from distractions and interruptions. Make sure that that room won't be disturbed, nobody will popping in to make a cup of tea or coming in to get a file, and really ensure that they have the best chance possible to concentrate and reflect on their learning within that environment with the EPA. As I'm talking through these slides, please, if you have any questions, please type them into the question section of your webinar control, and I will be addressing those at the end. So particularly if you have any about the showcase, the interview or the evidence, please start to type away and I will address those when I get to the end. So they were the main questions that we received last time. If there's anything there that I didn't cover and you want to ask, please pop it into the question pane. So I'm going to move on now to the practical observation and the questions that we received about this. So this is their, at the first point they will see the EPA and the part of the assessment where they will meet and demonstrate their practical demonstration of the standard. So a very popular question, what happens if every area of the standard is not observed by the EPA during the observation? Now, we all know customer service it comes in lots of guises across lots of industries and sectors. And the day of the observation, we need to see customer interaction. And if it's an environment where you're reliant on customers coming in or footfall, it may be a day that particularly perhaps isn't very busy. So the first thing I'd say here is when you do book your endpoint assessment for your apprentice, make sure it's at a time of day and the day of the week that they are going to be able to practically demonstrate their knowledge, skills and behaviours against the standard for the observation. Now, the observation should be planned at a time that is suitable for them to do this. Please think really carefully about that. So if you know that particularly Wednesday morning is quiet, please don't book their endpoint assessment that morning. It's fundamental that during the practical observation, the apprentice will interact with customers in order to meet the requirements of the observation criteria as listed in the assessment specification. The EPA may ask the apprentice questions regarding the observation during the professional discussion to clarify what has been observed. But large areas of the standard will not be covered during that professional discussion. That professional discussion and the time that we have remaining after the mandatory criteria has been covered is again about clarification, asking questions perhaps about a scenario, just checking and getting those further clarifications. It's not about asking questions about the standard that should be practically demonstrated. It's really important that you note that. The area of the standard that was put together for the practical observation has to be practically demonstrated by that apprentice as much as possible. Okay, if an apprentice fails their observation, can they resit this component of the endpoint assessment? So the answer to that is yes. And if the apprentice fails any component of the endpoint assessment, their showcase or their professional discussion, they can book a resit with the City and Guilds endpoint assessment team. Where a fail does occur, the EPA will compile feedback and that will be provided to you on the criteria that was not met by the evidence presented either in the showcase, during the practical observation or during the professional discussion, and that will be within 20 working days of the endpoint assessment and sent through to the training provider for you to see. So that's applicable to all areas of the endpoint assessment. So I'm going to move over now to the professional discussion and the question that we had there. So question we get asked, can the professional discussion take place remotely? Now, where possible, the professional discussion will take place on the day of the endpoint assessment. So the observation will take place first, followed by the showcase interview, and then by the professional discussion. But in the answer to that, it is possible for this to take place remotely. If they can't undertake their professional discussion for any reason, please let our endpoint assessment team know when you're making the booking, and we will work with you on this. As we are today, we're engaging in a webinar. We have had professional discussions take place remotely with the IEPA. Of course, where possible, it is best if that is done on the same day. So the assessment can take place on one day for that apprentice, and it's not drawn out, but we appreciate there are circumstances when you will need to do that remotely. Now, we also had some general questions about endpoint assessment, which was really good to see, which I'll now focus on. So the first question, how long would an endpoint assessment visit last? How long will you need the apprentice for? How long should we program them out from their duties, etc.? So let's just have a look at this. All endpoint assessment bookings are given a total of 3 hours by our endpoint assessment team to accommodate the new showcase assessment. This will consist of, as we've discussed, a practical observation. Now, please note that that's a minimum of an hour, but if the IEPA feels that they need to observe for longer, it will be a maximum of an hour and a half. So they could be observed potentially for an hour and a half. The showcase interview, of course, is then a minimum of 15 minutes, mandatory, and to a maximum of 30 minutes. And the professional discussion, minimum of 45 minutes to a maximum of 60 minutes. Now, please do also bear in mind the apprentice. So at any stage, they may want a breather, a quick break, give time allowance, depending on the room, where the room is that you've arranged for us may not be nearby to where we've observed the apprentice. All these different factors to take into consideration, please, when you're thinking about that, that booking. Also, our IEPAs will arrive earlier than the endpoint assessment start time. That's to ensure that the necessary ID checks are carried out. So please remember to have photographic ID with them on that day, and also to meet them, answer any initial questions. We don't want to arrive and go straight down and sit down with them and observe. It's we obviously want to take that time to meet the apprentice and answer any questions. Another thing to note, on occasion, our IEPAs may be accompanied by one of us of the 4 lead independent endpoint assessors, and this is part of the City and Guilds quality assurance process. So if you do have an EPA and 2 of us arrive, please, don't worry, and we do explain to the apprentice they're not having 2 independent endpoint assessors that day. The IEPA is purely there to observe the quality assurance process of that IEPA. To alleviate, we have had times when there's 2 of us arrived, and there has been thoughts that there's going to be two IEPAs on that day. Okay, next question. Is there any flexibility in the timings or the order of the assessments? Okay, so the professional discussion must always be the last component that is assessed. If you have any particular needs with regards to time of the observation, or again, you need the professional discussion to be remote, please let the endpoint assessment team know when making the booking. The more information you can give them and share with our team before the day, the better. So we can make sure everything runs smoothly for your apprentice on the day, and our IEPA is fully informed of the requirements. Next question, is there any flexibility for apprentices who have additional learning needs or any additional requirements? Again, if that is the case and they do have additional learning needs or access arrangements need to be put in place that need to be considered for that endpoint assessment to take place successfully and on the day, please again engage with our endpoint assessment team. They're there to support you, to help you. They are there to communicate all of this to the IEPA when that booking's made. The more information that can go on our booking form to support you and the apprentice, the better. So please do ask. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the questions that I wanted to focus on that you all sent in and shared with us. So I'm going to go over now to some of the questions, some of the questions that you've sent in to me whilst I've been talking. So the first question, let's have a look. Thank you to all those that have sent these through. So the first question I have here, what happens when the IEPA does not see parts of the observation? So as I said before, we have the professional discussion acts as a way of the IEPA asking some additional questions to the apprentice, and the IEPA will make that judgment on the day. So if large areas of the standard have not been met, and it wasn't possible to see all of that, then they will make that decision. Potentially that observation is a fail, and if it's a case of there wasn't the opportunity on that particular day, we don't want to disadvantage our apprentices, but equally there is a minimum requirement that we need to see, and the area of the standard that looks at right first time, which is about meeting customer expectations, managing the customer interaction, and the journey that customer is taking with your apprentice, that's imperative and really important. And of course, we're looking for communication and interpersonal skills as well. So please look at the standard, look at the areas that that they need to be practically demonstrating, and try and pick the very best day for them to do that. So I hope that's answered your question.
We do have questions, Veronica.
Megan, sorry.
You have 2 more questions. The first question is, what happens to learners that have gone through Gateway already and are waiting for an endpoint assessment date? It seems unfair. They have to have an interview. Okay, so as Dom mentioned, the interview is mandatory now from the 1st of December, from the 1st of this month. So in terms of the point you made about that being unfair, the interview is no different really. It actually will benefit the apprentice. Previously, any areas of the showcase that were needed clarification or needed further discussion would have been addressed during the professional discussion. Now, the professional discussion is a maximum of an hour. Before the IEPA reaches those questions about the showcase, the learner has to, had to get through the mandatory criteria. So whatever time was left was then allocated to observation questions and showcase questions, and in some instances that was not a lot of time left. So this interview has both alleviated the pressure off the apprentice and the IEPA to get all of those done within that short time, but also gives them more time to meet the criteria within the showcase, to add depth and richness. So it's actually giving them a better chance and more time to do that. So I appreciate that your point there, but we've had some already taking place across the country, obviously because we're now on the 5th of December, and they've been hugely successful and well met. The apprentices haven't really noticed that much difference. The IEPA just explains that we will now be having a showcase on your showcase evidence, and then the professional discussion is done after that. And we appreciate that is a little bit more time the learner is spending with the IEPA, but of course it's all to help support them through their endpoint assessment. The next question I have here is, why are we not advised prior to the visit if you are arriving with the IEPA? That's a good question, and it is something that we're looking at, because if you can appreciate how many bookings our endpoint assessment team are dealing with across all standards, and it very much depends on the availability of the LEPA team to accompany the IEPAs. So just to be assured, it's something that we're looking at, and we very much hope to be able to communicate that to you in the future, so you do know, especially with areas where it perhaps there's not a lot of room during the observation, if you're behind a counter, or there's not much room, you know, for to that apprentice. But if that is the case, the LEPA team, we're all very much aware of that the customer service environments differ hugely, and we will, during that visit, ensure that we don't disadvantage your apprentice in any way, especially you know, if there's tight space, etc. If your apprentice, if it's, you know, in terms of additional needs, and they would find that having an extra person there particularly stressful, or would affect their ability to perform the day, please do let the endpoint assessment team know. And of course, we take that into consideration, because you know, our interest is with the apprentice, and we will make sure that we accommodate that. Another question we have here
So, are we still okay to send the old showcase as learners have started to work on these? Yes, of course. Like Dom said, if you started to work on the original format, and if you continue to do that, we will accept those. And the only difference is that that learner will have a showcase interview as part of their showcase portfolio. Moving forward, as we said, new cohorts where you've got new learners starting at the beginning of their apprenticeship, please do have a look at the 2 new methods. Have a look at the support documentation we've put together for you, and you can see that how well structured they are around the pass and distinction criteria. So of course we will still accept those. They are not assessed in any different way. We still assess them against the pass and distinction criteria against the standard. If the apprentice asks to get their showcase after the interview has started, are they able to go and get it? Okay, so again, the IEPA won't prompt the apprentice to go and fetch their showcase portfolio. If the assessment started and they suddenly say, can I go and get my showcase? As long as we've not well into that assessment, and we then have to pause for them to go out and get that. So to try and avoid that, please do prepare them and have it with them if they want to before the assessment starts. Obviously it's a recorded assessment under assessment conditions, so it's not ideal that we would then stop that for them to go and get their evidence, and that would be a decision made by the IEPA on the day depending on where they are with that assessment. What sorts of questions will be asked during the interview? That's another good question. Now, the questions that will be asked are based around the evidence that was submitted at Gateway. The IEPA is not going to ask any trick questions. It's all based around the evidence that the apprentice submitted. So this is why it's important that you make sure that they're refreshed on that evidence. They know the examples they've put in there. They know about their learner journey. They understand the evidence they've put in, because the questions the IEPA has have for them is all around the evidence, adding depth, asking for clarity, giving them the opportunity to add richness to the examples they've given. So they are the questions. If you look at the standard for the showcase portfolio, it'll be all around those areas: knowing your organisation, personal organisation, developing self, all those key modules that you can see in the standard. Will be the questions that will be asked. Let's have a look if we've got any other questions.
I think that's it now.
It is, yeah. I think I've covered all of those. Thank you for those questions. We'll certainly add those that haven't been included in the FAQ document. I will put those in. Thank you.
Many thanks, Veronica. It's much appreciated. Just to reiterate then that this webinar has been recorded and will be available for you to watch and share with colleagues. It'll be uploaded to our City and Guilds website. We are constantly running events. I'm hosting one in Wakefield next week. Please look out via Focus Alerts for upcoming events. We consistently, or constantly rather, update you on best practice, lessons learned, etc., and any recommendations around specific standards such as business administration, customer service practitioner, customer service specialist. I do regional networks, which means I try and get around the country. So please do look out for Focus Alerts, as they are mainly advertised here, as well as Twitter and LinkedIn. If you're not signed up for Focus Alerts or feel that you're not receiving those emails highlighting where the events are and when, please go onto our webpage. At the very bottom of the webpage, it does say as a link that takes you to email updates. If you click on the link and sign up with your email address, simply tick the areas of interest to you, whether that's health and social, business, etc., etc., and you will receive all Focus Alerts to do with that specific sector. So finally, I'd just like to take the time to thank you for listening to this webinar. We hope that it's been of use, and we look forward to working with you all in the future.